Hello and welcome to Cinema 76. In this series of videos I'm going to go through everything you need to know about how to read movies. And if you have the goal of making films or you're actually making films, this can also give you strong ideas about how to make them better. In the last program in this series we went through a single scene. This time we're going to expand that a little bit and look at 3 scenes and how the language of film can contribute to a narrative arc. And luckily we're going to look at one of the greatest pieces of political storytelling ever put on film. Gillo Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers from 1966 tells the story of the guerrilla struggle of the Algerian independence fighters against the French Empire and how they achieved independence by 1962. The film was made very soon after the events and it has that freshness and immediacy and a certain documentary feel, but that's not to say it is not without considerable art in its filmmaking, as we will see. It was considered so accurate a piece of storytelling that it was used as a training film by groups such as the Black Panthers, and it was even shown to President George W. Bush, strange scene though that is to imagine, so that he could understand the kind of resistance US troops might get when they entered Iraq. The scenes we're going to analyse come about 40 minutes into the film. The Algerian Front for National Liberation, the FLN, has been assassinating French police and other targets in the European quarter, and the French police have decided to seek vengeance by planting a bomb in the Casbah, the Algerian quarter. And the first scene we see is the terrible carnage which results from that atrocity. In the second scene, we see the angry response of the Algerian crowd, rushing down the streets towards the European quarter. And they get stopped by one of the leaders of the FLN, who tells them that this will be a massacre and they should leave it to them to enact revenge. In the third scene, we see the beginnings of that revenge as 3 militant women from the Casbah prepare themselves by disguising themselves as European women in order to be able to smuggle bombs into the European quarter.
التحرير هي راح تدخل في الطار، الهدوء جبهة التحرير هي تدخل في الطار.
So how are these scenes built one upon the other? The first and most obvious way is via the contrasting soundtracks. The opening scene has this solemn, funereal music, which sounds like European classical music. And then that's followed by natural sound, the shouting of the Algerian crowd as they rush down the streets towards the European quarter, ending with the extraordinary ululating war cry of the women. And this is followed by Arabic indigenous music, which transforms that boudoir scene into an act of war. This last music appears to be very authentic. To be precise, it's the combination of a khrakeb, a pair of metal castanets, and a tabl, a type of large drum. I was fortunate to find online an example of the khrakeb, which I will play for you now from Guitarabe's YouTube channel, with thanks, merging into the sound from the Battle of Algiers. Over the three scenes then, we have a kind of dialectical progression, starting with European classical sounding music, which is then contrasted with Arabic natural sound, the chaotic shouting and crying, and then a synthesis of the two by means of Arabic music. In terms of the narrative arc, the soundtrack takes us from defeat and tragedy via an anarchic, angry response to a detailed plan for a counter-offensive. The soundtrack therefore represents a path of revolutionary struggle. Now let's listen a bit harder to the soundtrack. There are basically four elements to the constructing of any film soundtrack. First of all, sync sound dialogue, speech. Secondly, ambient sound, the sound of the street, the stadium or the cafe. You need to record this even when a room is silent, by the way, because every room sounds different and silence makes a noise. For this reason, it's often called room tone. There's that awkward time on any film shoot when the sound recordist has to record the room in silence, because otherwise it'll be impossible to cut one bit of dialogue to another bit of dialogue. And somebody giggles, someone else sneezes, and the sound recordist becomes more and more angry. Thirdly, spot effects. These are specific sounds added in the edit, such as a door closing, a car driving off, or the firing of a gun. Fourthly, music. Now listen carefully again to our first scene and notice where the editor adds spot effects. So the scene starts with music only, and then gradually towards the end adds the chink of the pickaxes in the rubble. Why have they done that? Well, inferior directors, when they edit a montage of images, they slap music all over it without regard to the reality of the scene. But Pontecorvo wants to heighten the emotion here and make us feel that this is something real. So it's important that he adds some spot effects to make us feel this is like a real building site and they're pulling bodies out of this destroyed building. If they just put music on it, it would have a kind of distancing effect. And if they'd started with the sound of the women crying and all the noise of a building site, the music would have less impact. So what he's achieved is a delicate balance in the soundtrack between these two elements. We'll return to looking at sound in a moment. Now, in an American movie, there is usually a single protagonist, and this central character, we follow their journey and empathize with them. One of the most difficult things to do in movies is to have multiple protagonists, because there's a danger that the focus of the audience gets lost and they stop empathizing. So Pontecorvo does this really cleverly, because this is a film about an entire people, or at least an entire revolutionary class. So the focus is shifting from individual to individual. Early on, it's a character called Ali Lapointe, who we follow becoming politicized by his experience in prison, and then becoming a leader of the guerrilla group. Pontecorvo continually finds ways of making us empathize with these characters. This famous final scene of the women dressing is about 3 anonymous women. Let's call them A, B, and C. But only one of them is, in this scene, the protagonist. Just one. Which one? Okay, so there are just 9 edited shots in that sequence. But it's clear, isn't it, that woman A is the protagonist at this moment in time. She's the one who undergoes the most change, as well as having the most screen time. She goes from wearing scarf and veil to peroxiding her hair.
Ça va, monsieur?
The opening image where she takes off her face covering is more than just a piece of film action. Under the French Empire, there was actually a whole pornography of images of Arab women fetishizing the veil. And French soldiers would drag women into the public squares and forcibly unveil them to sort of Frenchify them. So this image has the power of iconography, and perhaps partly explains the anxiety that the actor has in performing this scene. Most of the actors in this film were amateurs, by the way. Women A and C in this scene were, in fact, sex workers in the city of Algiers. And woman B was a middle-class woman who was spotted by the director in a cafe. And because of the age-old association of acting with prostitution, he had to go and explain to her parents that it wasn't that type of movie. Returning to the editing of the soundtrack, let's listen out for spot effects again. So this is how you tell a story in just 9 shots. You can use something as simple as haircutting, but haircutting once is not a drama. But if you, as she does, looks at the hair anxiously, and then cuts one braid, and then cuts another braid with a loud spot effect to make you feel the scissors snapping the hair, then it becomes a drama. Here's the screen grab and keep diagram of this scene. We can see it's kind of bookended. It's a kind of arch structure. It begins with the close-up of woman A, and then zooming quickly out to the 3-shot. And it ends with a 3-shot, and it goes in reverse. It tracks in to the close-up of woman A. So if you thought this was interesting, please like the video. That helps with the algorithms. Make a comment, and I promise to respond to anyone who does that. And subscribe to the channel. And most of all, share it to anybody else who you think might like it. Thanks very much.